There are some footballers who really turn on the style for their countries. Lukas Podolski played his best club football for Cologne, struggling to establish himself at either Arsenal or Bayern Munich. But for Germany, he was among the most effective international players of the modern era, scoring 49 goals from 130 caps and playing a starring role at several tournaments. Eduardo Vargas failed with 4 separate clubs over more than 5 years in Europe, including Queen's Park Rangers, yet he has scored more goals at international level than Sergio Aguero, Karim Benzema, and Radamel Falcao. Guillermo Ochoa, it is well established at this point, doesn't actually exist in between international tournaments. If you think that you've ever seen him playing club football, you were imagining it. Even that image is AI generated. Yet, even at 73 years of age now, he still somehow spawns out of a swirling vortex somewhere in Guadalajara every time there is a Gold Cup or World Cup, and performs like prime Peter Schmeichel. Whether it be the pride of representing your nation, the system of the national team, or being a big fish in a small pond, there are some players, for whatever reason, who just thrive on the international stage. There are also some players, however, to whom those same factors bring out the worst in them. Growing up in England during the 2000s, the only question you heard asked more often than "why can't our players reproduce their club football for the national team?" was "how dare they ban us from smoking indoors?" and "are we absolutely sure that Saddam Hussein definitely has weapons of mass destruction, because that really seems like something that we should try and be sure about." The likes of Lampard, Gerrard, Rooney, Terry, Ferdinand and Scholes all faced accusations of playing worse for England than their clubs. It is a complaint that is far from unique to England. Mark Viduka is undoubtedly one of, if not the greatest Australian footballer of all time, but despite scoring 92 goals in 240 Premier League games, he only scored 11 goals for Australia, over half of which came in just 3 games against the Solomon Islands, Singapore, and Thailand. Claudio Pizarro is among Peru's greatest exports, along with alpacas, of course, starring in the Bundesliga for about 20 years with Bayern Munich and Werder Bremen. Pizarro, that is, not alpacas. Yet he was considered a perpetual disappointment for Peru, averaging less than a goal once every 4 games. And, even more recently, Duvan Zapata struck 19 times in successive seasons and lit up Serie A with Atalanta, but he only managed a meagre 4 goals from 34 caps for Colombia before retiring from international football prematurely in 2021, having just failed to score in 7 games at the Copa America. But what about currently active internationals whose performances for their national team fall farther from their club performances than Keir Starmer's parliamentary record falls from the 10 pledges that won him the Labour leadership in 2020? Yeah, I bet you didn't expect Keir Starmer to catch a stray when you clicked on this video. No one is safe. Well, anyway, it's funny that you should ask, because that's what today's video is all about. So without further ado, who isn't an active international, and whose international performances were probably actually better than his club performances, so he would just be a totally nonsensical inclusion by every possible metric, I've really no idea why we're even talking about him. It feels like a total waste of time. Here are just 7 great players who are significantly underwhelming for their countries, with some honourable mentions thrown in later on, if you play your cards right. 7th. Trent Alexander-Arnold. There is an argument with some players that they haven't, or don't, necessarily play poorly for their countries compared to their clubs. They just don't play at all. Philip Billing, for example, who is currently starring for Napoli on loan from Bournemouth, has never really done anything of note in a Denmark shirt, but I was surprised to discover that he's only won 5 caps. Meanwhile, Gabriel Magalhães has been equally ineffective for Brazil, where he has a considerably worse reputation than he has in North London, but he's only won 13 caps at the age of 27. 13 caps! David Luiz won 57. You could argue that Trent Alexander-Arnold falls into a similar camp, although, firstly, he has been capped 33 times, and 33 is a much bigger number than either 5 or 13. Trust me, I've done the maths. And secondly, there is an argument to be had that the reason a player might not have won that many caps is because they haven't been especially effective or impressive for the national team when given a chance. One could make the case that if England cannot get the best out of Trent Alexander-Arnold, that is very much a them problem, given his immense talent, but we're not interested in a blame game in this video. It's all about the gulf or contrast between club and international performance levels, and the fact of the matter is that Trent Alexander-Arnold has been one of the best right-backs in the world over the last 7 years, and literally the most creative and effective in an attacking sense. Yet you can count the number of memorable or impactful moments that he has had in an England shirt on a single hand after sawing off 3 of your fingers in an extraordinary act of self-harm that I certainly would not recommend. It would be a totally unnecessary extent to go to just in order to make your points. Far easier, I think, to just name the moments. It was that goal against the USA in Rooney's quasi-testimonial in 2018, over 6 years ago, by the way, and that belter that he scored from outside of the area in a 4-0 win against Malta in Euro 2024 qualifying. Now, I wouldn't even be surprised if most people didn't remember at least one of them. I mean, we are talking about a goal in basically a testimonial against America, and another goal against a country of just 500,000 people who are ranked 168th in the world in a qualifying game. This from a fullback who was instrumental in Liverpool becoming one of the best teams in Europe under Jurgen Klopp, has made the PFA Team of the Year 3 times already, is about to win an 8th trophy and a 2nd Premier League title at Anfield, and is expected to be on his way to Real Madrid as Florentino Perez's latest Galactico. Trent has literally been the most creative fullback in European football for over half a decade, but he hasn't registered a single assist at either the World Cup or the Euros for England, and he has fewer standout moments in an England shirt during that time than either Calvin Phillips or Tyrone Mings. Incidentally, Trent played in midfield, almost as a number 10, in that game against Malta in 2023, for which he was lauded, and the suspicion at that point was that he would find a new home for England in the middle of the park, alongside Jude Bellingham and Declan Rice. Indeed, that is exactly what Gareth Southgate tried to do at the Euros, not for the first time, before swapping Trent out for Kobbie Mainoo when the latter proved to be more effective and England looked to be a much more cohesive unit with him in the team. The reality is that England's plethora of options at right back, most notably Kyle Walker, have prevented Trent from ever nailing down a spot in the England team. That lack of security has prevented him from ever playing with the same freedom that he does at Liverpool, or England's coaches from developing a system with the assumption that Trent will be the starting right back, and when he has played anywhere else, against anyone half decent, it hasn't gone very well. Whichever way you cut it, and whoever you blame, the gulf between Trent's club and international performances is immense, now aged 26, so I can think of few better players to get us started. Maybe he will nail down the spot as Walker approaches 35 years of age, and Reece James can't stay fit for more than 35 minutes, or, maybe Tino Livramento will somehow end up ahead of him as well. 6th, Bruno Guimaraes. There are a lot of Brazilians who could have featured in this 7. Despite some very underwhelming recent tournament showings by their own high standards, Brazil still have an abundance of talent, especially in midfield. For a long time, it seemed as though Fernandinho and Fabinho were considered to be 2 of the best defensive midfielders on the planet in England, owing to their performances for Man City and Liverpool, yet they could barely get a look in ahead of Casemiro when he was fit for Brazil, and neither were particularly appreciated. Roberto Firmino, likewise, even when producing his very best form in a devastating front 3, alongside Sadio Mane and Mohamed Salah at Liverpool, always seemed to play second fiddle behind either Gabriel Jesus or Richarlison on the international stage, a selection decision which very few Brazilians disagreed with, based upon his performances for the national team. Well, now there are 2 more Premier League players who fall into that camp, Lucas Paquetá at West Ham and Bruno Guimaraes at Newcastle. 2 of the best midfielders in the Premier League when they're at their best, and when Paquetá isn't serving a potential lifetime ban for alleged spot fixing. Neither of them are nearly as highly regarded in their native Brazil as they are in East London and in the northeast of England. Joelinton, meanwhile, can barely get a sniff, only having been capped 6 times. Paquetá has been a bit more of a mixed bag, enjoying impressive link-up play with Neymar when the latter was fit, but looking ineffective against a low block in qualifying in Neymar's absence, and failing to provide the spark that Brazil demand of creative or attacking midfielders. Guimaraes, meanwhile, hasn't even had his moments. Capped 33 times in total, he has scored 1 goal for the Seleção, which was a far from decisive third goal in a 4-0 win against Bolivia exactly 3 years ago. As with Trent, one can make certain concessions for Bruno. Brazil's midfield has often looked dysfunctional in recent years, regardless of the personnel. Nonetheless, he has very rarely, if ever, stepped up and put in a truly laudable performance for the national team, which is why he has so little credit in the bank with Brazil fans. Since most Brazilians also don't watch too many Newcastle games, the perception among many in Brazil is that Guimarães is distinctly mediocre. The comments on his Instagram after pretty much every international break range from the unkind to the potentially criminal, and many Brazilians would rather see the likes of Gerson, who was much less impactful in Europe but is currently starring for Flamengo, start ahead of him. As far as many Brazilians are concerned, a midfielder being technically proficient and having a tidy range of passing is the bare minimum requirement. The true test of their talent is whether they can dictate the midfield, create an opening when no one else can, or produce a moment of individual brilliance, weaving their way through the opposition to decide the outcome of a match. Guimarães has done literally none of those things for Brazil, hence his contrasting club and international reputation, and his inclusion in this 7. 5th, Paulo Dybala. Sticking in South America for now, one thing that must be said is that it can't be easy performing for countries like Argentina and Brazil. It is brutal enough in England, with the weight of the nation, a toxic media ecosystem, and 60 years of trophylessness on your shoulders, but the Argentina and Brazil shirts weigh heavier than an ultra-heavy flannel shirt from Ironheart. Bit of a niche reference there, wasn't it? One for Derek, the menswear guy on Twitter, assuming that he, like Keir Starmer reportedly, also watches all of my videos. That wasn't product placement or a brand deal, just to be clear. As you all know, I have never done one of those, but if anyone from Ironheart is watching and wants to send me a free shirt, then go ahead, because they are far too expensive for me to ever be able to afford one because, well, I don't do any brand deals. Where was I? Oh yeah, Paulo Dybala. Aside from the immense pressure and expectations of playing for Argentina, there are a few things which have contributed to Dybala's poor performances and lack of opportunities on the international stage. The first is his similarity with Messi, both positionally, stylistically, and in terms of all-round profile, and the fact that Messi has basically been the best player on the planet throughout Dybala's entire career, meaning that he was always going to start for Argentina, except for those couple of weeks where he used to retire after getting knocked out of a tournament. Secondly, there is the fact that, especially as Messi has aged, and his role has become a primarily creative one, where he requires both runners on the flanks and in front of him in order to stretch the opposition, and to do his running off the ball, Dybala doesn't really fit any of those requirements, unlike, say, Julian Alvarez or Lautaro Martinez. And thirdly, Dybala has had a pretty rotten time with injuries, which has limited his minutes at both club and international level, in addition to preventing him from ever fulfilling his true potential. With all of that having been said though, Dybala is still a wondrous footballer, with few technical peers within the entire sport, who is absolutely joyous to watch at his best. For all of the setbacks, we are still talking about someone who played nearly 300 times for Juventus, won 11 trophies, including 5 Scudettos, and made the Serie A Team of the Year 4 times, collecting the Player of the Year award in the 2019-20 season. At his best, Dybala scored 26 goals as a second striker in the 2017-18 season and made 31 goal contributions in total in the 2019-20 season, as well as finishing above Antoine Griezmann, Eden Hazard and Karim Benzema in Ballon d'Or voting as a 24-year-old. For him, now aged 31, to have only scored 4 goals for Argentina, which is 3 fewer than Nicolas Otamendi, is fairly remarkable. In total, Dybala has made 11 goal contributions, combining both goals and assists, from 40 caps since making his debut a decade ago, and he has played a grand total of just 38 minutes of football for Argentina at the World Cup. 4th, Bernardo Silva. It feels like open season on Manchester City players at this moment in time, since so many of them have fallen so far short of their usual standards this season, but it is just worth remembering why expectations have been set so high for them. Bernardo Silva basically seemed to be faultless for about 6 years. He could play anywhere, he was a technical marvel, and he never stopped running. He was a manager's dream then, and I use the past tense very tentatively because it's not as though Bernardo has been the sole cause of Man City's downfall this season, and age 30, I'd be surprised if this were a permanent regression as opposed to a mere blip. For Portugal, however, the diagnosis may be much more terminal. Even when Bernardo was a virtual ever-present, playing 55 times in a treble-winning team, making the FIFA Pro World 11, and earning Ballon d'Or nominations, he was still being heavily scrutinised in Portugal for his subpar performances for the national team. Unlike a lot of players in this seven, whose poor form has seen their caps and minutes limited, Bernardo has already been capped 99 times by Portugal, putting him 8th in their all-time appearance charts, and theoretically capable of climbing as high as 2nd. There are some Portugal fans who would be content if he never even made it to a century though. So busy at club level, even when not performing at his absolute max, when it comes to tournament football with Portugal, Bernardo has been anonymous all too often. He had a good Euro 2024 qualifying campaign, in which Portugal won 10 out of 10 games and were never even tested, but in an international career spanning 10 years, that's not a lot to show for it. Even in terms of goals, Bernardo has only scored 13 from 99 caps, over half of which have come against Gibraltar, New Zealand, Luxembourg, Lithuania, Liechtenstein and Azerbaijan. Or, as they are commonly referred to within international football, the Big Six. He's not the only one in fairness. Both Palhinha and more recently Ruben Neves have failed to replicate their club football on the international stage in Portugal's midfield, but Bernardo's disconnect is the most jarring when he should arguably have been one of Portugal's 2 or 3 main men during that time, which is why he's the one who features in this 7. Third, Marc-André ter Stegen. You've got a feel for Marc-André ter Stegen in some respects. A brilliant goalkeeper who has been so good for so long at club level, he has the misfortune of being just 6 years younger than one of the greatest goalkeepers of all time, who has been Germany's number 1 since ter Stegen was 18, and whenever he gets the opportunity, such as since Neuer's retirement from international football, he seems to fumble shots like he's an Italian who just joined Manchester United in the sweet summer of 1999. Poor Massimo Taibi. It's been over a quarter of a century now, and he is still the cultural reference point for being a total car-crashing goal. Poor bloke only actually played 4 games, and he won the Man of the Match award in one of them. Anyway, ter Stegen made his Germany debut some 13 years ago, following his breakout campaign at Borussia Mönchengladbach, when he had just turned 20 years old. Although ter Stegen never managed to truly usurp Neuer or nail down the number 1 shirt, he has still won 42 caps for Germany, which, well, it's not nothing, is it? There was a point, following the 2018 World Cup, and indeed in the build-up to it, in which Neuer's form was questioned at both club and international level, meanwhile ter Stegen was playing the best football of his life for Barcelona. Between 2017-18 and 2019-20, ter Stegen saw off the likes of Neuer, Alisson and Oblak to make 3 successive inclusions in the ESN Team of the Year, as well as making the UEFA Champions League squad of the season, alongside Alisson in 2018-19. Neuer, meanwhile, made just 3 Bundesliga appearances during the entire 2017-18 season due to injuries, but retained the number 1 shirt at the World Cup in Russia. This led to a personal spat between Neuer and ter Stegen, 2 excellent goalkeepers over national team selection, a little bit reminiscent of the one between Oliver Kahn and Jens Lehmann about 20 years prior. Ter Stegen complained that, quote, "It's not easy to find an explanation for what I am experiencing. I am still trying everything, but this trip with Germany was a tough blow for me," end quote, to which Neuer publicly responded by bluntly stating, quote, "I'm not sure if that helps us," end quote, to which ter Stegen clapped back by stating, and I quote, "I don't think it is up to Manuel to express an opinion on my feelings," end quote. Though there was a time, between 2017 and 2019, in which many Germans were open to the idea of ter Stegen overtaking Neuer, something which appeared to have finally reached a permanent settlement when Neuer retired from international football aged 38 following Euro 2024, That sentiment has shifted now that ter Stegen's club form hasn't always been rock solid, his international form has been very hit and miss, and there is a widely held view that the time for ter Stegen to nail down Germany's number 1 shirt has perhaps been and gone. It is worth noting that ter Stegen's form for Barcelona has wavered over his 10 years and more than 400 appearances for the club, as one might expect, and that his peak was probably about 5 years ago. Nonetheless, his club form in totality, in which he has been a generational talent, probably one of the 5 best keepers on the planet over the last 10 years, and at times arguably the best one, contrasted with his international form in totality, a perennial number 2 who has racked up 40 plus caps through longevity alone, but has never truly seized his opportunity or convinced Germany supporters that he is quite up to the job, is among the greatest contrasts among any current internationals, hence his podium position in this 7. Ter Stegen has missed most of this season through an ACL injury, and there are some Germans who would like to see Oliver Baumann or Alexander Nubel establish themselves instead of him, but Germany boss Julian Nagelsmann recently confirmed that, when fit, he still considers ter Stegen to be his number 1. Nagelsmann said that ter Stegen, quote, deserves to play in a big tournament after all these years, end quote. It is hard to disagree with the sentiment, but as a justification for actually starting him, it almost feels like charity for the amount of time that he has spent in Neuer's shadow. Perhaps that firm backing from an international manager is what ter Stegen needs in order to replicate his club form at the upcoming World Cup, but for now, he was one of the first names in my 7. Second, Phil Foden. Fresh in everyone's minds, or every England fan's minds at least, following another underwhelming performance for England in Thomas Tuchel's debut win against Albania, I almost left Phil Foden out of this 7 because he's only 24, and I didn't want to include young players like Xavi Simons or Victor Boniface, but Foden is so experienced for his age, has been on the scene for so long now, and has racked up so many caps despite doing so little of any note for England, that I think that he would be a foolish omission. When England won the Under-17 World Cup 8 years ago, and you can go back and check this because that was about when I started this channel, I said that, all being well with his development, Foden was the man that England should look to build their future team around. I said that because what England sorely lacked at the time, this was fresh off the back of humiliation against Iceland at Euro 2016, was someone who wanted to get on the ball all of the time, was very gifted on it, and was willing to commit players and take them on. Foden did all of those things, and he did them very well. What's odd, perhaps, is that his development has been excellent. He wasn't rushed but eased in at Man City under Guardiola, and yet, not only has the England team never been anything like built around him, it's never even felt like he was a guaranteed starter for England. I have seen it said that Foden just isn't that good, that he is a system player who's nothing without Guardiola, or even that he's never been that good for Man City. It's all just hype, and his England performances reflect that fact. I'm not exaggerating, by the way. I have literally seen all of those claims made in the last few days alone. Stated plainly, that is nonsense. Foden is a sensational footballer, often described by his club and international teammates as being the most gifted player that they've ever played or trained alongside, and he has been absolutely superb for 5 years at club level. I can't believe that I am even having to justify this claim, but Foden quite literally scored 27 goals and made 13 assists in 53 games last season, while playing roughly equal amounts of football in 3 different positions, and he won the PFA Players Player of the Year, the FWA Footballer of the Year, and the Premier League Player of the Season award, as Manchester City won an unprecedented 4th successive Premier League title. So yeah, he is obviously very good. That is why, heading into the Euros in Germany, Gareth Southgate once again felt as though he somehow had to shoehorn Foden into his team. The problem for Southgate, and admittedly, there are worse problems to have, was that he had Bukayo Saka and Jude Bellingham on the right flank and in attacking midfield, both of whom have performed far better for England than Foden, which is why Foden invariably ended up on the left. There's no doubt that he can play there, he did so 13 times last season, but England consistently looked at their best when they had fast and direct runners either side of Harry Kane. That is why they looked more effective with Anthony Gordon and, previously, Marcus Rashford on the left than Foden. Foden started every game for England at the Euros, and I will say, I don't think that it's quite true to say that he has been abysmal in every game that he's ever played in for England. That is a low bar, admittedly, but it's an important point of clarification. In the semi-final against the Netherlands in Dortmund, for example, I thought Foden was maybe England's biggest threat before being substituted in the 81st minute, and he was fairly unlucky not to grab a goal and an assist. 5 years, 44 caps, and 3 tournaments into his England career, though, the fact that a game in which he was bright and nearly scored and assisted before being substituted for someone who did actually assist a goal, Cole Palmer, is a stark comment on Foden's international underachievement in of itself. Foden has scored 4 goals from those 44 caps, half of which came in a 4-0 win against Iceland over 4 years ago. The other 2 came in a 3-0 win against Wales in the 2022 World Cup group stage, and in a 3-1 win against Scotland in a friendly over 18 months ago. That was his last international goal. He hasn't scored a single goal or registered a single assist since then. In 17 matches, against opposition including Malta, North Macedonia, and most recently Albania. So, yeah. For all of his struggles this season, even at club level, Phil Foden has been a magnificent footballer at club level for about 5 years, winning everything and doing so as Man City's main man last season, yet his international career, well, it feels as though it has barely started. Foden is still only 24, so there's plenty of time for him to turn that around, but following Thomas Tuchel's first game in charge, he didn't mince his words about either Foden or Rashford's underwhelming performances. Watch him go and score a hat-trick tonight now. It is inevitable. And you know what? I'd be happy for him. And because I'm an England fan. Obviously. First, Vinicius Jr. I think that you can make the argument that Vinicius Jr. has done slightly more for Brazil than Phil Foden has done for England. But I think that you could also make the case that Vinicius Jr. has done a fair bit more at club level and has an even higher reputation overall. For Real Madrid, Vinicius turned promise into becoming one of the most effective forwards in European football about 4 years ago when he scored 22 goals in his breakout campaign. When Karim Benzema departed in the summer of 2023, Vinicius inherited the mantle of becoming Madrid's main man and, in spite of the presence of Kylian Mbappe and Jude Bellingham, he arguably still is. Vinicius has not only put up tremendous numbers in Madrid, 29 goal contributions in 39 games so far this season, for example. He's also made decisive contributions at the most important moments for Los Blancos, which is a pretty good way to endear yourself to Real Madrid supporters. He has scored 7 goals in El Clasico and 2 in Champions League finals, still aged only 24, including the winning goal against Liverpool in the 2022 Champions League final. As Real Madrid's main man in a double-winning campaign last season, it was fairly well documented, shall we just say, that Vinicius felt hard done by to miss out on the Ballon d'Or. Part of the reason for that was because, in addition to his performances for Manchester City, Rodri was part of a Spain team that won the Euros in 2024. Vinicius Jr.'s international career, by contrast, has been one of bizarre difficulties in getting off the ground, given his obvious talents and club performances, and tournament failures. It has been suggested that Vinicius struggles with the pressure of playing for Brazil, which, though undoubtedly immense, would seem unusual for someone who became the main man at the biggest and the most high-pressure club on the planet in his early 20s, where his form, confidence, and ability to perform on the biggest stage has never really wavered. And yet, after 38 caps, Vinicius has only scored 6 goals for Brazil, averaging effectively 1 goal a year on the international stage. What's more, none of those goals have come against Argentina, or even Uruguay. He hasn't scored in the knockout stage of the Copa America, and his only World Cup knockout stage contribution came in Brazil's comfortable 4-1 win against South Korea. I am writing this video in the immediate aftermath of Vinicius scoring his 6th goal for Brazil, which was maybe his most important, coming in injury time against Colombia in a World Cup qualifier, but even that took a hefty deflection off a Colombian head before nestling its way into the back of the net. For one of the best players in the world, consistently at club level, it is a remarkable lack of goals, assists, quality performances, and moments on the international stage, which is why, for now at least, he deservedly takes top spot. It's a compliment, if you think about it. Sort of. Honourable or dishonourable mentions, again, depending on your perspective, go to the likes of Guillermo Maripan, Ruben Neves, Niklas Zula, Piotr Zielinski, Jack Grealish, Tunku Miners, Ilkay Gundogan and Joao Cancelo. There were a few more, but some of them I've already mentioned. But that is it for today's video. Thank you all, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. That's always apparently useful. And just a kind thing to do. Let me know some suggestions as to who you feel could have featured that I overlooked in the comments. And just any other thoughts that you have. And of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, if you like, to this channel, HITC Sevens, as well as my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now. So, it is really easy to do, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me elsewhere on the internet via all of the links down in the video description below, should you wish to do so. But much more importantly, of course, just go out and have a brilliant day. Cheers.